Hello, everybody. I definitely need a cup of coffee. So, all right. Moving right along. I want to continue a little bit of talk about semiotics and appearance. We touched briefly on color and how color relates to race and nationality and so many things on this planet, and often we have false and detrimental beliefs. I didn't really mention this in the book, and I may have to go back and write another chapter or write this into chapter 3. I have to think about it, but let's talk about gender and sex before you move on to temporal factors. Temporal meaning time, but let's briefly talk about gender and sex because we have certain assumptions in our culture, and certainly some of it's being challenged about what constitutes a masculine or feminine symbol. I mean, it used to be fairly obvious: pink for girls, blue for boys. Men like more solid colors. Women perceive more colors, and women tend to talk more and use more language and more words than men, so that's considered a masculine or feminine style. However, there's all this talk of transgenderism and homosexuality and things like that, and there's a lot of controversy over it. Um, I may say things that trigger some of you. I mean no harm. For example, all my life I have fought for people's equality in all ways and equal rights. So if you're gay or transgender, I you have the right to be what you are without being uh, having violence levied on you. However, certain aspects of that culture and those cultures seem to want to almost achieve dominion over certain areas, and the rest of culture doesn't want it. And it's almost like certain radical people want to make it a crime to question any of it. So both sides tend to hate me. Both sides tend to hate me. I'm a heterosexual male. I think women are works of art, and oftentimes they're a piece of work. All right. Sometimes interacting with them can be a great pleasure, and sometimes it can be, oh my God, what a great pain. However, despite that bias, let's say, despite my biases, I want everyone to be able to pursue their lives with other consenting adults how they want, but I also don't believe in imposing things on people. But it is, you see how I had to say all that because this is still a hot topic, hot button issue, and your maleness, your femaleness, your acceptance of roles associated with that have a humongous impact on your life. We don't have a lot of clear, unequivocal, multi-sensor information on any gender or sex these aliens might have. Oftentimes, all we have is an object in the sky that has a certain appearance and certain capabilities. And, we have this stereotype of the female driver versus the male driver, but would that apply to aliens from somewhere else or someone else or some other dimension? Do they have a gender? Do 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 they have gender, but more than one? Actually, more than one, right? I'm not talking about the whole LGBTQ thing. Are there like 3 or 4 biological genders, biological sexes with distinct physical anatomy and functions without which their species cannot reproduce and function, right? I mean, that would be a completely different thing. And how would you know? For example, what if they have the male and female sexes? I'm not talking gender, I'm talking sex. But what if a lot of what the females do appears masculine, right? And it would confuse us. See where I'm going? Human sexuality, gender roles, sex roles, cultural roles, status are still things that are often up for debate or have a lot of positive and negative connotations, and they appear to shift, and there's controversy associated with them. And we've been ourselves for as long as we've been here. If we encounter a complete other different species or more than one species, then what would that do to our interactions with them? Would it help or hinder our interactions with them, right? Now, on another note, what if they are truly asexual, agendered, and they reproduce by a complete other means? Or what if they're AIs? Now, I'm going to caveat this. We build AIs, we build algorithms into our electronics and, Google Earth and Google Photos and things like that. And we're running into issues where certain algorithms, certain cameras, certain computer programs, because they were designed by and largely by white people for white people, they have trouble recognizing black faces and things like that. Um, so it confounds our technology, and so the biases and orientations of a programmer and a creator can affect the machine and the program, even though the machine and program itself has no race, has no sex, has no gender, but it may have qualities that were consciously or unconsciously put in there. Like you have Siri, it has an Alexa, it has female voices, but it's it, not a she. But when you hear that voice, you start interacting with it as a she. Now, this is not new. I think even in the 70s or 80s, you had certain warning voices built into fighter craft that had female voices, and the best the best information, the best explanation I ever got for that was, when a pilot, they're men, right? When they're up there and they hear a woman's voice, they paid attention to it more because it was not their co-pilot. It was not outside radio. It was something that you wouldn't expect in an environment at the time. And it may also be that women might pay more attention to a female voice in certain situations. So you see how complicated this gets. It can be a rabbit hole, right? So I just wanted to touch on that, and I probably should write another chapter and add that, maybe make that chapter 10 or something. So let's talk about temporal factors and actions repeated over time versus unique actions. So, for example, if over time certain types of UFOs and UAPs tend to do the same things over and over again, that is a repeated action, whereas there might be certain things that just happen once and never happen again, or only happen once in a great while and don't appear to have any connection to each other. That is a different category of information. Now, how would we use temporal factors in the study of UFOs and UAPs? Again, I think there has been some research into this. I don't know if there have been meta-analyses like you do in mainstream science when you're really trying to get to the bottom of certain things. But for example, if you were to examine the duration of flights as they correlate to types of UFOs and UAPs and geographical areas, do certain types of UAPs have longer flights, tend to be up there longer? Do certain areas have longer or shorter or more frequent or less frequent activities? And that, I think, is tracked. I think MUFON tracks that, so kudos MUFON. And trends over decades, again, this is something that probably could get another meta-analysis using modern AI and maybe a team of scientists. Again, we have to find ways to prove that this is important. That involves funding. Funding doesn't come without lobbying. Lobbying doesn't come without the public being conscious and aware of these things and wanting something done. Day of the week. Are there days of the week, months of the week, seasons, years, where activity changes, increases or decreases, where certain things happen and certain things don't? I mean, for example, if they did certain things on Wednesdays versus Thursdays, that means they understand the Gregorian calendar and track it just as when they respond to uh, radar targeting systems, that means that they have a way of monitoring that and they respond to it. Um, Now, we have the lunar calendar, we have the Islamic calendar, which is more of a lunar calendar, you have the Chinese calendar, and if certain things correlate to that, does that mean that they synchronize with that? It could. I don't know how well that's being examined. Most of the UFO literature you get in the United States is in English, and you know, even if there were no correlation because everyone here is on the Gregorian calendar, um, they might see correlations there because they look more on certain days. People tend to not work on Christmas, so they might be at home seeing more. However, researchers not working on Christmas means they're less likely to research it then. You see how complicated this can get? And what about certain holidays? Again, that affects both the observer and the observed. So it would be really hard to get to the bottom of that without really investigating it from multiple angles and using statistical analysis. Um, Now, we have other types of time, ways of tracking time. I have what's called indigenous versus imported time. So, for example, indigenous would be Gregorian calendar, Islamic calendar, Chinese calendar. I'm sure there's a Vedic calendar, the Mayan calendar, right, and the days of the weeks and so on. But if if we were to say these UFOs and UAPs have a sine wave of activity and increase and decrease activity and certain things happen at certain times and they didn't necessarily synchronize with any of our earthly calendars, well, what about galactic time? Are there certain things, the rotation of our system in the galaxy, uh, episodes of certain pulsars, their periodicity? What about time as it's measured in a Martian day and year and month? Have we really thought about that? If there's like UFO activity that corresponds directly to the rotation of Jupiter or Mars and Mars day and night cycle, um, that means there's a correlation, if not a causation. And only serious scientific inquiry, serious statistical analysis, micro and meta analysis um, would tell us that. Again, that is kind of being done, but I don't know to the extent of it being done, and I don't know if anyone has said, well, does any of this correspond to the day and night cycle of Mars, Mercury, or anything like that? I don't know if that's out there. I'm throwing it out there. I hope if someone has a lot of time and they have the resources, it'd be interesting to see what you come up with. And funny enough, what if over time, if these things are from the future and they're on a certain schedule that doesn't correspond to our um, rotation of our planet and our rotation around the sun, what if in 1,000,000 years or 1,000 years or 1 billion years or whatever, if the Earth is still around? I know past a certain point, our star is projected to become a red giant and occupy our orbit and destroy this planet. But what if 50,000 or 1,000,000 years into the future, our day gets a little bit longer or shorter? I know the moon will get a little closer, and that might affect the months and so on and so forth. So, what if it corresponds to a computer projection of what our time would be like at that point in the future? What if it corresponds more to something, how all of this would be 1,000,000 years in the past? If you have that hypothesis that there's time travel involved, that would be one of the areas you would look into. And I don't know if anybody's done that. I want to throw that out there. I talked about how skin color, things like skin color and the shape of your nose, your ears, or whatever, the color of your hair, your beard, are relatively trivial compared to other things. They do tell you things, but not as much as something else. Um, However, there's also size. Again, height. Height is important. A lot of decisions are made about height, and it can affect your career positively or negatively. I mean, if you're tall and white in this country, especially a tall white guy, there's just a lot that you can benefit from even now, even with a search for equity. If you're a woman, I know there's very attractive women that are kind of really tall, and it seems like certain men will not approach them because they're like, she's too tall, and she may find a man attractive, but he's like way too short for me. I don't want to be seen in public with him because it would make me look bad. Um, and also, women in general tend to really like taller guys. I mean, taller than average. You've heard about the online dating scene where, average woman wants a man taller than average, richer than average, you know, um, and sometimes much taller than average, much richer than average, and her height and income and education might be average or below average, right? So again, these are, I'm not going to say trivial, I'm not going to say superficial, but they might not be as important as telling about a person and their life and their potential interactions with you than what's going on inside their head. But the truth of the matter is, I wrote this down. Perceptions prompt and guide actions. Let's say this again. Perceptions prompt and guide actions. And that is often visual, semiotic, and proxemic in nature. You know, picture a woman who really wants to meet this guy. Oftentimes, many women won't approach that guy in public. What they'll do is they'll use proxemics or stand a little closer. They'll make sure that they're visible, right? They'll tousle their hair or something. Many women put a lot of effort into their appearance, makeup, clothing, and so on and so forth. Uh, to the point where, when you see them in their day to day life, you're like, oh, she's not quite like when I saw her at that party, right? Um, Folks, there's a lot of nonverbal information out there. Things like a smile, a glance, a sneer, a raising of the eyebrows can have lifelong and even generational results, right? People can feel flirted with, disrespected, insulted, invited, empowered, praised, um, denigrated, often with a simple movement of the eyebrows. Kind of a surprise. Concentration. I can't make the upside down U voluntarily. That's like sadness, right? If someone's shaking your hand, they're kind of like tense like this. There's a fear going on, right? If they're shaking your hand and you can perceive an anger. And now, even if that is not directed at you, they could have been thinking about something that happened earlier or something beside you. That interaction is going to affect you. And again, this can have consequences for the rest of people's lives. It can be passed, those hostilities and affinities, even if they're false attributions, can be passed down from generation to generation. So, something like the UFO, the UAP, or even a face to face or face to whatever alien contact can have a long lasting, impactful effect. If we are to understand this phenomena, we need to understand that this is not a mysterious, cryptic silence. This is not a gaping lack of information. This is actually a symphony that is occurring, a rich symphony of sound and sight and action. And we have the tools to begin understanding it if we will simply pick up the tools and start using them. Okay? This is the end of chapter 3. We're going to move on to chapter 4 in the next one, but I need a break, and I've been talking a long time. My throat's getting a little dry, so have a nice day. Enjoy the rest of your day and live long and prosper.